Hi everyone and welcome to this video. What they are and how to use them. Then in the end we are going to talk about the rules we must remember when using variables in JavaScript. So in the last class we set up our work environment, we created app.js file in VS Code, and we wrote our first line of JavaScript code, hello world. So as I said in the previous lesson, we'll create a separate file for each of the topics. So for today we are going to create another file and name it variables. So you come up here and do variables, click on new file, variables.js. Enter, and there you have a new file, and this is where we'll write our code for today. So without wasting time, what is variable? Now variable is not exclusive to JavaScript alone. Okay, variables is available in every programming language. In fact, we use them in our day-to-day maths. So in computer programming, a variable is a named location in the computer memory where data is stored, or you can also see it as a container that holds data or value, and that data can be retrieved anytime by simply using the name of that variable as a reference to that data it is holding. So in JavaScript there are three ways of creating variables, and these are by using three different keywords that are available to do the job in JavaScript, and those are var, let, and const. Var, let, and const. So those are the three keywords we use for creating variables in JavaScript. For example, let's say we want to store a piece of data called age. We can simply do var age equals 24, right? Then we can also go with let and say let price equals, what should I say? Let's do year. Let's see. Let year equals 2022, right? And then we'll go to the third line and write const. Let's create a variable using const. And we do const. Let's use something that is constant, because const stands for constant, right? A constant variable that the value won't change. You can't reassign it. So let's do pi equals 3.14, right? So when we do console.log for these three variables, we'll expect to see them display in the terminal below. And once again, for people that want to run their code in the web browser, you can simply go to index.js right here and remove your app.js, replacing it with variables.js. That's all you need to do, and you run your code and it will work just fine. So going back to our variables, now we'll do console.log. So we do age. So console.log year, and then we'll go ahead and do console.log pi. We'll expect to see everything display in the same order that we've called the variables. So now let's come to the terminal down here and do node variables. Variables. So come to your file and save first. You make sure you save the file, and for those running it in the web browser, also make sure you save the file, and after using the script in index.html, save the file also in your HTML so that your code will work fine. So now we'll come down to variable, to the terminal down here, and we'll click enter, and there you have it, 24, 2022 and 3.14. Sorry. Now, why would we use these variables instead of just doing console.log 2022, console.log 24, or console.log 3.14? Because if we do that, it will still give us the same result, right? But why we use variables is because it allows us to easily reuse the value. Okay, once we've created the variables, it gets stored in the computer memory. Okay, so that makes it readily available for us to use anytime we need to use it. Okay, so let's see another example that we are going to work with. I'll show you that not only can you store value in variables and then use them later, you can also use them to perform operations, right? So let's do something like this, and let's say let a equals 2, right? Let's do let b equals 3. Then if we go ahead and set these two variables, we'll set their results, the sum of the two variables, to another variable. So now let's do let sum equal a plus b. So if we console log sum, now what do we expect to get? We'll expect to see the result of adding variable a plus variable b. We'll expect to see that result because sum has been set to the result of adding a and b together. So let's save our code once again and run it. So a shortcut you can use, instead of typing node variable every single time, you can simply press the page up button, and that brings up the last command you use in the terminal. So let's enter, and we'll see 5 down here. This is it, 5. So 5 is the result of adding variable a plus b, which is 2 plus 3. Can you see that even though we do sum equals a plus b, what we actually get is the result of the values inside variables a and b. So when we call a variable, we are simply using it as a reference to the data or value that they hold. That is what variables basically stand for. So now we'll go ahead and I will tell you the difference between these 3 keywords for declaring variables: var, less than, let, and const. But before we go there, I want to give you another example that will really show you why you need to use variables, and then I will explain why you should avoid using var. Okay, why you should avoid using var in your code. So what example should we use right now? Okay, let's assume you have to write a report on an incident, right? And you need to repeatedly use a piece of data. Let's assume a name in the report. We are going to focus on the name specifically. So let's try and come up with a report. Let's do okay, let's do Okay. Console.log and write the variable. What we are writing now is called strings, but we are going to talk about that in data types later. What we've been using 2, 3, 3.14, 2022, those are numbers, but we'll talk about them in data type, which will be the very next video after this one. So let's try and write a little report where we'll be using one name repeatedly. Let's say okay, Sam was sitting on the couch when Sam thought he had a knock on the door. I hope you're enjoying our story. When Sam thought, okay, let's go to another line here. Do console.log and continue our story. When Sam thought, how should we continue? Okay, when Sam thought he heard a knock on the door, right? When Sam thought, okay, let's not use he, we use when Sam thought Sam had a knock on the door. So we'll change the first one for the purpose of our variable later. So now when we run this code, everything will work just fine. Okay, it's just like we are printing the string literal to the terminal. So let's save and then go down here to the terminal and see what we do. Once again, page up, node variables appears, and enter. So you see, Sam was sitting on the couch when Sam thought Sam had a knock on the door. So now this code works very fine and it's a perfectly valid JavaScript code. Let me add my semicolon down here. I just love to do that, but there's a better way we can do it. Remember the name Sam, we use it repeatedly 3 times by repeating Sam every single time. So what if there is a way we could do it that we won't have to write the name directly, but instead of using the name, we can simply use a variable instead. So in this our Oscar winning story, we allow Sam to specifically occur several times. We are not using any pronoun. So now we'll go ahead and use and create a variable, right? And what we'll do is let name be equal to Sam, quotation, Sam, semicolon. So now we come inside here. What we'll do now is we'll remove the name and then we'll come out and do name plus what should we call it? name was sitting on the couch when Sam. So we always add name to every place that Sam occurs. So we'll come here, add a semicolon, and do remove Sam and add name. So you use a plus symbol, name plus. Thought Sam had a knock on the door. So let's remove Sam once again. Name plus. So yeah, our code is perfect now. So what happens when we run the code? Let's save and see what happens. I will come down here. So when we do page up node variables and we enter, we'll expect our code to work just fine. Okay, everything is clumsy because there was no space here between the name. Let's create space here. Let's add space here also. Another space here. Okay, full stop. Then let's add some space here. And also some space here. And another space here. And let's save. I'll expect everything to work well this time around. So there you have it. Sam was sitting on the couch when Sam thought Sam had a knock on the door, right? So what is the advantage of using the name Sam here? It helps us to write our name in one place. So we don't have the problem of misspelling it. We are less likely to misspell the name down the line. Imagine this is a story or a report that is about 100 pages long or even as big as a book. Okay, we can simply write the variable name in one place and use it anywhere we want to. And another thing is, it is easier to simply change the name anytime we feel like. Imagine something happens that we feel like changing the name, or we decide to use Sam's second name, right? For people that have two names, you can simply come here and say name, because what name should we use? Let's see, Paul, right? No, we always have to put it in quotations. Paul. So let's save. And now what do we expect? The first console.log here, the first one, we'll expect to see, for the two names in the first console.log, we expect to see Sam. And for the last name in this last console.log here, we'll expect to see Paul. So let's go down to the terminal and run our code. Node variables once again, page up, don't forget. And then we enter. So Sam was sitting on the couch when Sam thought Paul had a knock on the door, right? So you see how useful variable is, and there's even a better way to write this whole thing, but we'll get there later. Now let's talk about the difference between var, let, and const. So there used to be just one way to create variables in JavaScript, right? For long, since the very beginning of JavaScript as a programming language. And that's through the use of the keyword var, the first one we wrote up there when we just started the video today, var. Now I'll discuss the problems with var in a separate video later, because some of those concepts are a little bit advanced at this stage for a beginner to grasp. We are going to be talking about variable environment, the global environment, and stuff like that we really need to see why var can easily mess up your code. So In 2015, ECMAScript, which is the body governing JavaScript, and they decide what goes into JavaScript and what doesn't, right? In 2015, they decided to add two new ways to create variables, and the purpose of adding those two new keywords, which are let and const, was to solve the problem with var. In fact, if you ask me, problems, So that 2015 update to JavaScript was a really big one, and since then there has not been such a big update to the language, right? And it is popularly called ES6, or to the less popular name ES 2015. You can call it either of the two, but it is popularly called ES6. And since then there has been little updates to the language every year, but ES6 was a really major one that turned around the language. So many features were added to it, which were intended to make it more modern and also to be able to write code that is less prone to error. So right now, as we speak, we've already used var. So var is still around, and although it is not advisable to use it, especially for beginners, but more experienced developers will usually know how to get around the nuances of the keyword var. So you might ask, why is var not just removed from the language altogether? And there is a reason that can happen, at least for now. And that reason is because there are things we call legacy code, right? And these are ancient code bases that are already written in JavaScript using the var keyword. And those code bases still needs to be maintained. And for this reason, var will continue to stay around. So var will continue to stay around into the foreseeable future because we still need to use them. Now, back to length and const. These two are now the recommended way to create variables in JavaScript. So, another question. Why did they bring two keywords instead of just one? Since var was one, all we needed was just one keyword, right? To replace var. But there's a reason for that also. And the reason is that even though they perform the same task, right, which is to create variables, they actually do it in two different ways, which is to create block scope variables, to be precise. The way they do it is quite different. So what's the difference between let and const? The let keyword allows us to reuse the name of a variable like we did here. Like let name equals Sam, and then we come and reuse that name again equals Paul. So with const, we can't do something like that, because with const, any value we create, we declare with the variable any variable we create using const. Values assigned to them in the beginning cannot be changed. Okay, you can simply go to that variable where you create it and probably change the value. For instance, let's do some examples here. Let's say let's price, we'll still get that, we eventually use price, right? Let price equals 20 and say const username equal Cornelius, right? So when we do console.log here, let's go with price first, and then we also come down console.log username, right? So what do we expect to see After saving our code, we simply come down here to the terminal, page up once again, and we expect to see 20 and Cornelius. Okay, those are the values assigned to the two variables we created using let and const. But now let's come down here and show you how you can redeclare variables created using the let keyword, but you can't how you can reassign. There is a difference between redeclare and reassign. Don't mistake it. Sorry for that mistake. How you can reassign variables created using let. So we'll come down here and do price equals 30, right? And that's it. So we also come down here, console.log price. So let's come down here and try to reassign the variable we created using const keyword. So let's do username equals, what name should we use? Let's say Christian. Right? Now let's also console.log username. We save, Ctrl S, and then go ahead to run our code in the terminal. Note variables. And then what do you get? It says type error, assignment to constant variable. Okay, type error, assignment to constant variable. Any variable created with const is a constant and cannot be reassigned to another value. Okay, now this is where the error is. It displays it for us. Username equals Christian, type error, assignment to constant variable. We can't reassign variables created using const. It's not possible. Okay, so now when we come back here, we'll comment out these variables. We comment out both lines, or let's just remove both outrightly. So price worked just fine, but we'll get an error for username because we declared it using const, making it impossible to reassign it. And once again, let me correct the mistake I made earlier. You can only reassign variables created using let. You can't redeclare them. For instance, if we come up here, after creating the variable using let price equals 20, it worked fine. And then we'll come down here and say price equals 30, and it worked fine also, right? Because we reassigned it. But if we go ahead now and try to redeclare the variable again, and by redeclaring it means we did not just write price, okay? We added another let keyword to the beginning, and now we have another let price. So you see, even before saving it, let me go ahead and save it. Okay, even before and after saving it, our editor is telling us what is the problem now. It says cannot redeclare block scoped variable price. Okay, we can only reassign, but we cannot redeclare, and that's why you are seeing the red everywhere, because your editor is telling you what you are trying to do is not possible. It's against the rule of the use of let in JavaScript. So now back to the million-dollar question: which one of these two should you use? Well, it depends on the situation. If you wish to reassign the variable, use the let keyword, or else use const as much as possible. For me, I use both interchangeably, but I will advise you to lean more toward const, as it makes your code to be more precise, less prone to error, and a little bit more clean. Okay, so now we are almost at the end of the video. Let's go and look at the rules that we must obey when creating variables. And the very first rule that is important, that you must, not you should, you must obey, is that you must not use JavaScript reserved words or keywords. Things like this const, let, console.log, those are keywords in JavaScript that you cannot use. And I'll give you, let's go to Chrome, and here you have it. This is a list of keywords in JavaScript. We have await, we have break, we have case, we have continue, we have else, we have enum, we have export, we have extends, and many of these things we are still going to talk about them later along the line. We have super, we have public, return, we use return in functions. Super, extends, those are things we use in classes. Okay, if and else, those are conditional statements which help us run one part of the code if a condition is met, and the other part of the code if the condition is not met, or if another condition is met rather. So what is the second rule we must obey when creating variables? Variable name can only contain letters and numbers, and the only symbols we can incorporate into our variable names are the $sign and underscore, right? Numbers, on the other hand, cannot start a variable name. It should either be somewhere in the middle or at the end. And also you need to remember that JavaScript is a case-sensitive programming language. And what do we mean by case-sensitive? Let's say we do let food equals rice. Right? And then we come down here and say let food equals rice, or equals beans rather. Those are two different variables, and you see, unlike earlier when we tried to redeclare the variable price and we are getting error red everywhere, right now the editor is not complaining, and if we run this code it will work just fine, because this first food, as far as JavaScript is concerned, is not the same as the second food. They both contain the same data type string, yes, but they are not the same. And why is that? It's because the first letter of both words are not the same. The first letter of the first variable food is in lowercase, while the first letter of the second variable food is in uppercase, and that is only what separates them. So if we go ahead and run this code, console.log food, both of them, our code will work just fine. Now, what else can we also do? When naming variables, you need to follow a format called camel case, right? So that is what I used up here when I was writing the username. That is when you write the first letter starting the first word, you allow it to be lowercase, and then the first letter of the subsequent words will come in uppercase. And that is what we use in this variable username. You see the U in user was lowercase, then the N in name is uppercase. So if we use about 4 or more words, no matter the number of words you use in your variable name, which I don't know what variable you are going to create with such a long name, always make sure the first letter starts with lowercase, and then the subsequent words, the first letter starts is uppercase. Then what next? What next can we look into? Okay, use meaningful names, right? Instead of writing F, you will say let food equals rice, instead of just let F equals rice. No one knows what F means. It could mean the other word, okay? So let food equals rice, Instead of username, you went and write UN. UN looks more like United Nations than username. So go with a name that is meaningful. And I think we've tried to do that throughout the lesson today. We see that with age, we see that with pi, we see that with year, and now username, price, food, and all that. So make sure you use a variable name that is readable, meaningful, okay, and easy to understand. And why you really need to do this is because you are not going to be the only one reading your code. You will write code sometimes that other people will need to read, and you need to make it as readable as possible, and not just for other people also. As time goes on, as you begin to get more competent with JavaScript, you start building projects, and sometimes you can build so many projects that you start a project 2 months ago which you stopped, and now today you go back, you don't want to open your code and you don't understand anything going on there. You can't even remember the variable names, because instead of writing username you wrote UN. Instead of writing age, you said let A equals 24, right? So you don't want to end up in such a situation. And lastly, this one is important, okay? So even though you can reassign variables using let, you need to be careful how you do it, so as not to end up in a messy situation where you won't be able to trace the original value you want to use. Okay, for instance, let's go to the first let's go to that our short story. Here you have it. The first name was Sam, and then the second name was Paul. Now let's imagine this story is about 100 pages, right? And you change the name in about 15 places. Sometimes it might be hard for you to know exactly the first value or the second value where you reassign it. So most of the time it's better for you to set a new name. Instead of saying let name equals Paul and you now let name equals Sam and you use the same name equals Paul, it is perfectly fine in this situation. But in a bigger scenario like the one I'm talking about, imagine the story is about 100 pages long. You can easily say let name 2 or let second name is better, equals Paul. So that way you'll be able to know Paul is second name, and you'll be able to do it subsequently like that, so that you won't end up in a situation where you don't know where you reassign a name that you want to reuse. Alright guys, that's it for this video. There are so many things we still need to look into, things like string concatenation, but I will do that when we treat data types later. This video is long enough for variables. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and if you do enjoy it, please make sure to like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Turn on your notifications so that you get notified each time I upload a new video. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.